Friday presentation. Today we're going to be talking about a really interesting topic. Text is all you need. LLM-enhanced incremental social event detection. My name is Griffin Higgins, and my supervisors for my directed studies course are Prof. Ali Gurbani and Dr. Shishan Zhang. So a little bit about me. I told you my name. I'm also a PhD student in computer science here at UMD. I'm a cybersecurity software developer here at CIC, and of course, I love nerdy things. And this week, I'm going to talk about some very nerdy things, and I got this. I generated it from ChatGPT. We're going to be having a kind of a clash between two of my favorite things, which are LLMs and GNNs, or graph neural networks. So we'll see which one might win a little bit. Some objectives. We're just going to introduce this paper, go over the various sections. I'm going to give my review, and then I'll open the floor for some questions. So in terms of an introduction, we might think about three things. We might think about social media, we might think about events, and we might think about documents. We're going to bring all of these things together here today. So in terms of social media, I think we're all familiar with this. We might think of things like Twitter, or Facebook, or Instagram, or TikTok, or Snapchat if you're really hip. But yeah, these things are places where we can all socially congregate and kind of share information that might be happening in the real world and that we can pull back later. We might also talk about documents. So in this setting right here, we're going to be talking about social media text specifically that's taken from different kinds of social media items like posts or comments or shares, etc. They're all going to count. And then the last thing we're going to talk about are events. And I always thought I knew what an event was and how to define it, but once we really start to think about it, it's kind of tricky. The best definition we have is something significant that happens at a given time and place. So we need some measure of significance, we need some measure of location, and then we need some measure of time. And in social event detection, or SED, they bring all of these things together so that we can see that if we have social media, we can produce or extract documents from that that are also produced by humans or maybe machines. And then we can also use these documents within their social setting that they were extracted from to identify, categorize, and track different events that might be occurring in the world, presumably in real time. So we might say, I don't even use social media, or why should I care about events, or just so what? Why would this matter? So even if you don't use social media, it's important for everybody to understand what events might be happening in the world, right? There might be some crisis unfolding, so you should know, even if you don't have social media, it's good for people to be able to detect that. And why should I care about these events? Again, some of them might be very important. What if it's, unfortunately, there's a number of very emergency kind of situations that can occur that we've seen in the news recently. I'm not going to name them off, but we can think of them. We might want to know if they're happening around us and alert people to them. So that also kind of builds up the so what as well. So jumping into some overview on the paper, we might first look at these connected items and think, whoa, look at all these connected things. Like, I know something I could use that works with this kind of connection or this relational data. I could use a GNN, right? And GNNs are fantastic. They're called graph neural networks, and basically they work similarly to a CNN, if you're familiar with that, where they take the neighborhood of information that a node might belong to, and they aggregate it, and then they also share that back out with their neighborhood, so we can get this kind of representation that's given here for the node A, for all of the nodes that we see down below for each node, and then this will presumably be something very unique and representative of this graph or this neighborhood for a node. And we can do lots of things with it, of course. And GNNs are very cool. They work with graph data. They're used extensively in proteins, malware detection. They have nice properties. They're explainable. They're abstract. But the stories kind of start to end here, unfortunately, the good times. GNNs are not free. Graph construction itself is a very expensive process, or it can be. Heterogeneous GNN training is also very expensive. If we have graphs of a dynamic nature where there's constant nodes coming in and out, that might make your life difficult. And then the last one that I've tacked on through personal experience is that operations generally on very large graphs tend to live near NP-Hardville. So basically you do not want to go to this place. It's going to make anything you do very, very difficult. And of course, I'm not talking about every conceivable operation on a graph, but just things like, for example, finding the shortest path through a very large graph is hard. So those are things that might come up. So now what if we did the most 2025 thing you could think of and said, what if we used an LLM instead? How might this work? And that's essentially what the core argument of this paper and what these authors do. So in terms of the methodology, they propose LLM-enhanced social event detection, or LSED, and we're going to break it down a little bit. So the first thing they do in this work is they collect basically these message blocks between a given start and end time, and these blocks will contain some set of documents that we're going to use. And the first thing they do in this work is they take an LLM and they summarize all these documents. And we might be thinking, why do this? This sounds kind of expensive. What benefits might there actually be from summarization alone? Well, it turns out that some text is actually very, very short. And if we don't do this kind of summarization, it's going to be hard to do the next step or the next thing that we're going to talk about. There's also multilingual challenges. So perhaps if there's a document in French, we can get that translated back to us as a summary in English, and that might also assist the next thing we're going to talk about. Short text is also highly ambiguous, and there's difficulty classifying it. And LLMs are great because they can help us summarize this text and disambiguate certain things. So for example, if we see the word or the acronym LLM, an LLM might expand that to be large language model and give us more context. In the work, they use the following prompt. So summarize the sentences, where they input the sentence, and it says, if you come across abbreviations, expand them, please respond in English. So that was step one. Step two is going to be vectorize, summarize messages, and a given timestamp. So for each document, we're going to have its text, and then we're also going to have timestamp. And we're going to basically push whatever summarized text we just received through this pre-trained language model. But what actually is a pre-trained language model? What's an embedding? What's a sentence vector? What's time embedding? What are all these things? Pre-trained language model, just very off-the-cuff description, is a machine learning model that has learned to associate words together through billions of examples. And it does so very well with high probability. I'm not going to get into exact technical descriptions of that, but just know that it will be able to produce us some kind of embedding at the end of the day that looks like this. So if we consider Euclidean space, we might see king and queen might be represented with some kind of distance between them in some location, and man and woman might also be represented similarly. But we can see that these things are very similar. This is a classical example. So we can see that that distance between king and queen and man and woman might be similar. They might occupy similar regions. So that's kind of the whole deal, is that the semantic meaning behind these words is also captured through these language models. What is a sentence vector? We're going to do the same thing for words, just with sentences. And what is a time embedding? Essentially, we're going to have this tuple. So whenever somebody posts a document, we're going to say it occurred on the 10th day, and we're going to consider 100 or 10,000 days and divide it by that. We're also going to consider the number of the second it was posted, and as well as the maximum number of seconds in a day. And this will give us a tuple that will just depend on to whatever sentence vector we get after from the sentence transformer or the pre-trained language model. So okay, after this, we're going to do something pretty nifty. We're going to take this embedding and we're going to push it through a hyperbolic representation. So this is kind of new. This is something I haven't really come across before. I've heard of it very vaguely. But we can think back to Euclidean representation, and we see that kind of purple where we might have the x, the y, and the z for the location of one of these words. But what about a hyperbolic representation? And specifically, what about a hyperbola model? And I'm gonna put you this Poincare model, ball model. So the hyperbolic representation essentially looks like this, where we will take what was normally in a nice grid living kind of world, and we're going to push it into a bowl world. So instead of this, where we might have king and queen existing kind of in this Euclidean space, we're now going to put them on the inside of this bowl, so it might kind of wrap a little bit. So the top model is the hyperbolic model, and then the bottom model is the Poincare disk model. So we might be able to project from the hyperbolic model onto this disk respectively. We might be also thinking, how do we get from the Euclidean space to the hyperbolic space? We have a mapping for that, and we do that with the following operations. I can go over them later more if people have questions. And then also we can do the same thing onto the Poincare disk. It's called a Poincare disk here, but once it gets out beyond 3 dimensions, then we call it a Poincare ball instead. So that's how we might go back and forth between these things. So okay, I don't know why that's there. And we might say, same thing, why do this? This seems very kind of strange, what benefit is there? So when we think about text, we can understand that this is a very hierarchical kind of thing or data structure. And one of the key observations is that this hyperbolic embedding representation helps capture this hierarchical structure quite well. It's used in other areas in graph learning and what have you. And I guess one of the claims there of the authors is that this is one of the first times it's being used for sentences and kind of text. And it actually has a big effect, as we'll see later. So the last thing they do is they basically kind of train their model with all of these parameters. So if they're doing inference, they might use softmax and update or if they're doing training, they might use softmax and update the parameters. And then later they're going to do clustering using these methods. They also use a hyperbolic graph neural network or something very similar to learn the representations and how to actually cluster all of those samples together, because at the end of the day, that's the thing we're after, is we want to cluster these samples together so we can talk about an event. Something I also forgot to mention earlier is that each of these documents, it's going to have a label for an event. So we might talk about the CIC Friday presentation. If 10 people all posted this and we clustered them all together and they were very close, we would say, hey, this cluster is for this event. We might not be able to say it's for the CIC Friday presentation, but we would just know it's an event because they're all close, versus maybe something else that's happening some other time, we would see it in a different place. So this is basically the algorithmic view of everything I just talked about with the color coding for the different steps. But now I guess let's talk into some of the experimental setup and the results, because I also don't want to run out of time. In terms of the data sets, they use the Events 2012 data set, and it has almost 70,000 English tweets, and it ranges over 503 different events that occur. And then they also consider the Events 2018 data set, which consists of French tweets with about 64,000 samples and 257 different event classes. Some of the metrics they use are the normalized mutual information and adjusted mutual information, so that they can actually talk about how well a given model might be clustering these events together in very high dimensional space or hyperbolic space. The models they use for doing the summarization come from the Llama, so they might be using Llama 3, Glen 2.5, Gemma 2 with varying kind of parameter counts. And for vectorization models, i.e. like the things that are going to take our text and convert them into numbers, they use SentenceBERT or SBERT, and this is more commonly known by me as all mini LM L6 V2. Whenever I see that string, I think sentence encoder. And then they also consider word-to-vec. So this one is a little bit more of an algorithmic approach versus this one's a little bit more of a neural network approach, I believe. They also consider two different settings. They consider the offline setting. So the first 7 days of tweets in both data sets are kind of reserved and collected as offline data, which is called the message block M0. And then all remaining data except M0 are divided into M1 and M2 respectively, with some windowing size. So getting into the results. Oh, I also forgot to mention, I talked very briefly about the sentence transformer. I also have a very quick example of that. So here we can see this is the sentence transformer from Sentence Transformers, or SBERT. You can go and just like pip install it if you want to. And then here we basically have a list of sentences. So the first one is, the weather is lovely today, it's so sunny outside, he drove to the stadium. So this next part actually encodes all of these sentences into these vectors. I'm only going to show like the first 3 dimensions here, but they're like 300 and something dimensions long. And then afterward, we can start to talk about the similarity between these events with respect to cosine similarity or distance between the vectors that we might measure. So if we run this, we'll see the following. So we can see the weather is lovely out today. We kind of push that through the sentence transformer, and then suddenly we have this vector of numbers, and it's actually 384 dimensions long. I just didn't want to show all of it. But then afterwards, we can do something very interesting. Even though we have these vectors, we can still map them back to their sentences, and we can talk about how similar they are. So we can say, and intuitively to you and me, this might make sense. The weather is lovely today. It's so sunny outside. Those things appear to be talking about the weather. they seem kind of similar. So this gets a 0.66 similarity score. Versus if we're talking about the weather is lovely today, he drove to the stadium, this has a 0.1 because it's not very similar. One's talking about people driving to stadiums, the other's talking about the weather. And then similarly for the last one. I just wanted to show off that very, very quick example of how that might work in practice. So moving on to the results. The offline results show a 10%, a 13%, a 5 and 6% increase over the state of the art, which is pretty great. And we're starting to approach like almost perfection with 100%. So that's really good. And again, this is for the normalized mutual information and then the adjusted mutual information respectively metrics. So we can see that they're both going up, which is good. For the online results, we see even better performance. So we can see up to like 21 and 22% for the events 2018 and 11 and 13 for the events 2012. Yeah. So after that, we can start to think about other kinds of results. Those were just, the prior ones were just about how well the algorithm is actually clustering everything. Well, it's not changing over. Just give me a minute. This is happened before. We just need to restart it. Yeah, just give me 1 minute. Yep, I got it. It happens. When that happens, you just like let it sit for a minute, unplug it, and just keep pressing the button until it works. Yeah, so for the final results, we can see basically they consider the other GNN-based models, and one of the really interesting things here is that compared to their LSED method, the GNN models take over a day to actually run. So this is something that's very familiar to me, so I understand why LSED might be so great with this perspective in mind. We can see that the best LSED, so the Quen 2.5 model itself, runs in about half the time. So that's pretty important if you're actually going to be implementing this in the real world, and maybe you want this as real time as possible, perhaps. And then I guess getting into some ablation metrics now, we might talk about what happens when we remove the summarization, what happens when we talk about if we remove the hyperbolic vectorization or embedding. So we can see that without anything, with everything, using the Poincaré model, we have like 0.6 or 9.6, versus if we start to remove the hyperbolic embedding, it drops down to 0.68, and then if we take away just the summarization, then it drops down to 0.78, and then if we take away the summarization and the hyperbolic representation, then it drops down to 0.53. So all of these things are very important and contribute significantly to the final method. If you want to ask a real good Q&A question later, say, why not ablate the SBERT or the W2V model, word-to-vec model? Again, we can also assess those two things. So we can see, is the SBERT model better than the word-to-vec model? And it turns out it is by far. We can also see this ablated with and without time. So time, adding that on to the sentence embedding, the thing we just talked about a little bit earlier, it adds about 2% onto the performance. So in conclusion, the hyperbolic embedding increases performance by about 34% and 38% for the respective data sets. Using SBERT over the word-to-vec model increases performance by about 8%, and including the time increases performance by 2%. And lastly, the Poincaré model is preferred over the hyperbolic model alone. Getting into my kind of critical review of the paper, I think related works also consider the adjusted RAND index for ARI. Why is this not used to be consistent with other works would be my first thing. I would also say heterogeneous GNNs are expensive, but I think that's kind of like you're taking a cherry-picked example. I think other architectures could help alleviate this. So if you're familiar with GraphSH, we might not have to consider all neighbors. We might only sample and aggregate a selected few, so why wouldn't that be considered? Maybe the time is better, or at least comparable with LSED. LSED explainability also seems questionable to me, and that's not something they're necessarily going for, but it is an important thing to think about when we're training and making all these models. I know the sentence Sentence transformer is also a model, so that's been trained on lots of data, so I'm sure there might be biases and things we should think about. And then also the summarization. Something they do talk about is if there's any hallucinations in the summarization process. They basically don't explore this super in depth, but they take 100 samples, and I don't think it ended up being really, really important. I guess just to touch on this too, the vectorization methods, they might be, or they probably will become quickly outdated. Data may drift when we start to think about events. New acronyms come up all the time and are used in various kind of social settings. How do we know that acronyms that were used in 2012 and 2018 or even today are going to be relevant tomorrow? So that's something to think about. That was my critical review. My personal review is to include the normalized mutual information and adjusted mutual information formula and information as well as some motivation for someone reading it for the first time. To have to kind of dig through and search for that was a little bit of a pain. I also wouldn't leave off the related work by stating that it's unclear if the hyperbolic spaces can improve representation learning. I just wouldn't include that. I don't think it strengthens the work. I would also say that in the work they consider when they're doing the prompting for the summarization, they actually use the word summarize this text versus like paraphrase this text, and they do a lot of analysis on this. I personally don't think this really adds too much value. I would have much rather seen more metrics or more models or things of that nature, or wildly different prompts rather than just like a keyword being changed. That's just my personal opinion. These are some of my references, and yeah, I think I'll open the floor for any questions. Thank you so much.